Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay
This
Moore.
is Greg Proops.
This is Jordan Harbinger.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This is
East.
Sebastian Younger.
This is Rick Marotta.
This is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
Hey, this is Skunk Baxter.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
This is Lawrence Lowe, and you're watching The Break It Down Show.
And now, The Break It Down Show with John Leon Guerrero and Pete A. Turner.
I love having Lawrence on the show. But first, I want to start by saying I'm doing these shows that feature some more classical musician type people. And it's in honor of my good friend, Robert Greenberg, who is taught everybody so much about music in general. He has to make a little bit of money. Talking about guys like Shostakovich, Wagner, Bach, Mozart, other Bach, other Bach, all these different people. And he's given us one gift of music. I wanted to make sure that I did something for him and like Mozart Haydn. He did 6
and of course, I went as a kid too. So anyway, and these are my whole family.
Here, where I'm saying, hey, Bob, I'm doing these wonderful things in your honor. And so this is the
now we have a college
guest.
and a high school.
And then, of course, we've got Steve, my homeboy from Benicia, who's also a guy who does pops and helped found the Macon Pops on to co-host with me. And just in general, hey, Lawrence, I mean, Larry or Lawrence, what are we dealing with during the show? Are we going informal?
We can go with Larry.
Okay. Larry, I appreciate you being on the show, man. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was a great surprise that you invited me. And happy to get to know you and the audience and get to know Steve as well.
So just in general, that everybody, Larry is a conductor. I saw him. He does a lot of guest conducting, which is kind of a cool gig if you ask me. But popped into my symphony over here. I always say my symphony, Larry, because I take ownership of it because, we have these wonderful places that folks fund and everything else, and then we should all take pride and ownership of it. So that's my symphony. That's my symphony hall, my opera house, whatever you want to call it. And we had the Midtown Men, who are really the guys that do the Jersey Boys show. They do that musical there. These guys are Broadway pros. And so they sang Christmas songs in front of the orchestra, my orchestra that you ran for a while. And what a fun gig. It's like you get to go out and try everybody's Ferrari out and drive all over town in it and bang things around.
Yep. Yeah, it was actually my first time conducting there. And I think one of the great pleasures, and I'm sure Steve can relate to this, of what we get to do is to meet these new orchestras and get to know them. As you say, like a lot of these orchestras, especially in the States, they're so good that they are. It is a little like a Ferrari or a Tesla or a Lexus or whatever. And to get to take a spin in this, with one of these bands, it's just incredible to see how, what each one has as far as a personality. And Pacific Symphony definitely has a totally gung-ho personality. And I think part of it is that, they have that amazing hall. And part of it was also just, I'm sure a lot of performers in general, me included, have been living through a time of, difficulty with performing. And so anytime we get a chance to perform in front of a big audience, like we did there, is exciting. And so, so the orchestra can feel it.
How different are these orchestras? I mean, and also, you're doing something that's more pop related as opposed to a straight symphony or whatever. How different are they?
Well, yeah, every orchestra is also unique and different. I think that you'll have, there are different principal players, different dynamics, different way that they play in the hall. The hall itself makes a big difference. When I was there, it was a Pops concert, so it was a little harder for me to get to know the orchestra in the way that I would in a classical where we would have like 4 rehearsals. But I still was able to get a great sense of the orchestra and their flexibility and their personality. And it's one of those orchestras actually where I don't know a ton of the musicians. Sometimes I'll just know a lot of people from school or whatever. Or from having been there before, or maybe they played in a different orchestra. I know the concertmaster of Pacific, but he wasn't playing in that because he was he was in Nutcracker Orchestra at that same time. So got to have drinks with him afterwards. But it was, so I went in not knowing anyone and just getting to know this orchestra for the first time, found them to be really responsive, and I really loved the hall. And I'll just throw like one other thing in. That hall, it's one of these famous great American halls. And when I was with Pittsburgh Symphony, we did this West Coast tour where it was like we played in San Francisco and we played in Seattle, we played in Orange County, and it was one of our favorite halls. It was just a really amazing place to make music from an acoustic standpoint.
I'm going to let Steve ask a question here in a second, but I want to get back to this area. And again, I encourage people, oh my God, like this, it completely is affordable to go in and see something. And a lot of symphony stuff is super short. You're not in there for 5 hours. You don't ever get that impression. You can go see a quartet and you're like, we're already out. And there's something magical about that. And then the Orange, the Seagram Center and that whole campus, I mean, it's gorgeous. You know, you were, I don't know how long you lived down there. I knew you were born down here, but what a campus, what a wonderful thing to go do and see. And it sounds beautiful in there. And I have no idea how it works, but they have like what I'll call a baffling system in there where they open up the hall or close it. And you look up when you walk in and on the sides and you can see like how it's set up. I don't know who decides that stuff, but how they play the building as well. It's just all that. There's so many things to look at. I have to find myself just disappearing into what that guy is doing. I love to sit up a little higher and close so I can watch the timpani dude, like doing whatever he does, playing Wordle or whatever it is on his phone. He's like, oh, time to bong, whatever. I love all of the things to look at. So everybody should go check out your concert hall because it really is a marvelous thing that those guys do there.
Oh yeah. And the things that you're talking about, those opening and closing, those acoustic, there are these acoustic panels that simulate. So the reason that they have them, and not every hall has them, but when I was with Dallas Symphony, it was also a hall that was designed by this acoustician named Russell Johnson from this firm called Artec. It's a really famous acoustician company. They did the Dallas Hall and they did the Orange County Hall, and they did the same thing where there are these panels that can open and close, and the ceiling can go up and down, and they do that. The ceiling is for different kinds of music, for more or less room space sound, and then they can open and close to simulate having an audience there to make it a little more dead when there's no one there to absorb the sound in rehearsal. And then when they open it up more with the audience there, it's supposed to have an equivalency. So that way the orchestra doesn't get surprised like, oh, it sounded totally different in rehearsal.
Well, and also just to jump in there too, for somebody who performs Pops concerts all over the place, it's important, especially in that type of genre, you want the hall to be a little on the drier side. Because it will help everything come across the right way. You're not going to treat the hall as you would with, Brahms or Mahler or Beethoven, as you would with, music of the Jersey Boys, for example, when you have a full rhythm section. So it's important that these halls are able to accommodate that, because I think so often, and Larry, I'd be interested to get your take on this. It just seems in the past, depends on the orchestra, but unfortunately, some orchestras it's pops. They don't really. They're kind of, and I don't want to get in trouble for saying this, but they're not that generally excited to perform pops. And, because it's just not what they necessarily want to do, but it brings in the revenue for them to be able to do some of the other things. And so I think people are starting, and organizations are starting to understand that you have to treat pops the same way as you do your classical concerts. If you want to have that high artistic product, and there's debate out there whether you mic an orchestra or not during a Pops concert, but then you get complaints if it's a big band generated Sinatra type of style, the band starts playing mezzo forte and you can't hear the strings all of a sudden, right? So I've had some interesting discussions about that, but if you as a conductor in particular, as you're trying to balance things, I'm sure you run into situations where you have orchestras like Omaha Symphony or in Long Beach who do pops great. They know how to treat the orchestra. They treat the hall. They deaden the hall. Then you have other orchestras who have a shell up. they either try to mic the orchestra with the shell, which is really counterintuitive, or they won't mic the orchestra at all. And then, so it'd be interesting to hear some of your experiences dealing with that. And how do you deal with that as a conductor?
Yeah. Oh, I mean, you're absolutely right. I know that Pacific does mic the orchestra.
Yeah.
And
they do a great job.
Yeah. And that was something they were actually, I think, historically, when that hall was built, they were hoping that they wouldn't have to do that, but then they found that they did.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably generally true. And you're absolutely right about it's better to mic a dead acoustic, and then you can amplify that rather than kind of dealing with reverb, which then goes into a reverberant hall, which then creates more ambient sound, and then you get this kind of washy mess.
Right.
When I was with Pittsburgh, just as a good example, because I was there for so long as when I was resident conductor there, I did a lot of pops there, and we did eventually we started really deadening the hall. Like we would put up curtains.
Yeah, that's such a live hall. Heinz Hall is so live.
Totally live. Great for Mahler.
Yeah.
Terrible for Chris Bodie. So we started deadening the hall. But then if we did a John Williams tribute concert, I've done there many times, those sorts of concerts, you do want it to be the acoustic sound.
Right.
And so they know how to play in that hall. We don't amplify it. And they're able to just create, and they take it seriously. So there is this, I think it's kind of a problem in the industry of generally not treating pops with the same level of seriousness. And I think the same can be said about anything in any series that's not like the classical series. For a lot of orchestras.
I love what you're talking about. Can we talk really quickly the difference between a pops or a symphony or an opera, just so folks who are uninitiated and don't spend a lot of time on it, but just talk about the basics of that so that we understand what we're talking about. And then why would pops not be on it? I think pops is great. I mean, as an audience member, so I want all of it, but I like pops.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's funny because we just assume we're just talking about it like everyone lives in our world, but most orchestras will have several series of offerings, and they'll have their classical series, and in the classical series you'll have all this Beethoven and Brahms and Tchaikovsky and Rachmaninoff, and a lot of the structures of these concerts are overture, concerto, where there's a piano soloist or violin soloist playing some concerto that's classical, and some symphony in the second half, and sometimes there's a chorus, and that's kind of this one very more serious. Generally, orchestras play a lot of rehearsals. Pops is film music, films broadcast with the orchestra playing the soundtrack, tribute bands, and video game music. It's a very, very broad, very broad. You can have the Indigo Girls, you can have Josh Groban or whoever, and Idina Menzel. These stars that play with the orchestra, and that's a pop series. And then there's all this other stuff like educational concerts.
That's really helpful and fantastic. I love that we're getting into this stuff. Why are pops looked not as favorably? I mean, these are all musicians wanting to play. You just said we're all excited to be playing in front of you guys again. Be no, but pops doesn't make everybody fired up on the orchestra side.
Well, I mean, part of it is that everyone who studies to be in an orchestra and spends all that time in conservatory, most of them are studying this music by Beethoven or whatever, and that's the kind of music that they've been training to play. And then once they get a job, then they realize that they also have to play all this other music, and whether or not they embrace that, it's not a guarantee.
Well, I also think part of the issue that I've seen, because I've worked with numerous conductors that have taken me out with them, or orchestras will bring me in occasionally if an artist doesn't have a drum set player, because that's a whole other ball of wax. Playing drums with an orchestra is a very different approach. I've seen some of the arrangements can be really terrible. And I think the orchestra is if you have a Chris Bodie or somebody on stage and the orchestra is just playing a bunch of what they call footballs, which is referring to just whole notes and half notes the whole night, texturally it sounds great. but to the orchestra, you've got some of the greatest musicians on the planet, and it's not musically satisfying for them. And so I think it's really important for the non-movie score sort of approach to music. That's why I've been lucky enough that the guy that I founded Macon Pops with, Matt Kattengoob, is an incredible arranger. And orchestras that we haven't worked with in the past, if they haven't taken his folder home, that we send 6 weeks out, because typically they don't have to. They can sight read the show. It's really, really, really easy for the most part, with the exception of maybe a couple of tempo changes or transitions. But he always writes something for the orchestra. The orchestra is the feature, and so you sort of get the surprise on stage when people break open the folder. But then inevitably after that first run through, they're like, man, this is awesome. Finally, we're playing something. And then you can see the energy change. You can see people getting into it. But I think that's also been part of the problem, because you've got, there are some great arrangers and there's some really bad ones. And some people just think, oh, this show's cheap, we'll do it. It's affordable. They've got arrangements already done. And, the orchestra's like, this is terrible. And so I think trying to break down some of that, it's just that there's been that stigma for many, many, many years. Or Pops was just sort of like the Arthur Fiedler light classics. That's kind of where it was for a while. And now with the how things have changed, like Larry was mentioned with, tribute bands and, movie scores and other popular artists, depend on who they have as arrangers, can really, it's breaking down that barrier. And I'm sure, Larry, you've had experiences conducting some awesome arrangements, and you probably get some scores you're like, what in the world is this?
Yeah. 100%. Yeah. And when you were saying, just for the audience, they're playing footballs, whole notes or half notes, that's just where the orchestra is just simply holding notes as like just holding the harmony and not really doing anything active. Arrangements make a big difference. This taking it seriously. I think if a conductor takes it seriously, if the person up there is into it, I think that makes a difference.
Absolutely.
With the advent of these films, I don't know if you've done any of these, but that they're all those John Williams Star Wars movies, and I did Nightmare Before Christmas this year for the first time. You can watch Home Alone or whatever, like Jaws, Singing in the Rain, Wizard of Oz. Great orchestral scores that the orchestra gets to play. It's very challenging. These are not these footballs. And so when the orchestra has to do that, a lot of times the individual members of the orchestra, they might be super fans of Raiders of the Lost Ark. And then to get to play it, I think adds a level of engagement within the orchestra that we are, conductors love to see and audiences can totally feel.
Well, and it's interesting too. And I think one of the reasons why those shows can be difficult, I've done the Singing in the Rain where you're playing to picture. It's challenging for the conductor in particular too, because you've got the clock, everything's got to be synced. You've got click tracks. And sometimes, like when I was with I think it was with Gene Kelly, his voice wasn't lined up with the click per se. So you're trying to, whoever tempo mapped the show I did, it was like, oh my goodness, I've got to find that happy medium where we're with Gene, but we're with the click, and it was stressful. And we did one with, it was with Judy Garland. We did her whole Born in the Trunk, and it was the same thing. Like her voice was where her voice, it's like, you don't want to be off from the main vocal. But so that adds a whole layer of complexity for the conductor. But because it is hard, not only from a technical standpoint, that way the music can be, really challenging, and there's some serious stuff to play. So it's and you've got the visual element, which I think is neat too.
I want to ask. Well, first off, I want to say, like, if you are in the Pops Orchestra and you're playing the John Williams things, the French horn dudes are stoked. Those guys are like, yes, we get to blow hard all show long, right? But so in modern music, right, you're on the kit, Steve, and in a lot of ways, you're in effect the conductor, right? But you also have this performer who's recorded and can't change to what you're doing, and then you have Larry trying to drive this orchestra and make the orchestra work, right? How does all that blend together when you guys are trying to sort out, like, there are a lot of ones, and from my point of view as a layperson, there's a lot of ones in that conversation we discussed. So how do you work that out?
Well, I think it also depends on the type of music, right? So say, for example, if it's more of a pretty straightforward, say Sinatra inspired show, right? The music will essentially play itself, meaning the rhythm, Larry will count it off, and he doesn't have to do too much in terms of keeping the orchestra together unless somebody's really not listening to the rhythm section, which has happened. I've had those experiences. But obviously if there's some con la voce stuff or some transitions, that's where I need to, in particular, because, where Larry's going to set the tempo, listening to the vocalists, all of that stuff, I've got to be locked and loaded with him on, for that particular thing. And I think, some conductors in that style, I've worked with conductors who try to overconduct, and that also annoys the orchestra, right? If you're playing a swing tune, right? Whatever, name Sinatra tune, everyone knows the song, or like even like I was doing a concert with someone and it was In the Mood, right? So, but they're really trying to dictate da 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 da. It's like just, and that was real. This was with a very well-known orchestra, and they were just like, really? I mean, so a good conductor, looks at the what they're going to conduct, and there's stuff that they can just kind of let the rhythm section do the thing. And obviously, if you have a bad rhythm section, then the conductor's got to go, whoa, I got to steer the ship. Come on, come over this way, guys. You're dragging or you're rushing, or so. And I'm sure Larry's had numerous experiences where he has to manage 4 or 5 different things simultaneously and keep everybody happy.
Oh yeah. I mean, what you're saying, getting out of the way, there's this thing, once an orchestra is in the groove and there's like a good rhythm section and the tempo is not changing, it's not necessary. In fact, it's sometimes detrimental to overly conduct, to try to, I don't know. I mean, a lot of this music, if you start it in tempo and you get it going, you can just stand there. If it's a good orchestra, as a conductor, I can just stand there and not do anything. I mean, even in this Jersey Boys concert, which I had never done before, did it the one time in Pacific. Once we would get something going, I could literally stand there and just occasionally give a cue, and it would be fine. That kind of show just plays itself once you get through the rehearsal process, which that's kind of where you do all the work. And you want to get to that point where the conductor's role is not ensuring that every single beat is together, because that should happen automatically once we get to a certain point after rehearsals.
In LA, we have, I don't know if you guys have played, I think you have, Steve, but the Hollywood Bowl is just this fantastic, from a fan's point of view, just an incredible, probably my favorite venue I've ever been to in America. They love to, and it's LA, so right down the street, like around the corner, are all of the greatest singers and performers, and it's just all right there. So they did a thing where we did the whatever anniversary of Little Mermaid, and so the orchestra is playing, and then they're bringing out, and here comes, and it's Celine Dion or whoever, right? And then she walks in and she does a number and she walks out and everything, and they're showing the movie basically on like the facade of the venue of the bowl. And so you can see enough of the movie to kind of get a vibe for it. And then they add some extra visual stuff in. And so you have like this movie screen effect. You have the band doing it. You have all these incredible people who are hyper talented and well-known. So you're excited about it. And then just right during the rainy part, the lightest ever Southern California rain started dropping on us. I didn't even pop an umbrella. But fellas, it was so magical to sit there and like be a little bit cold, be a little bit wet, and watch like all this watery goodness. Those magic moments. Now, I want to talk about the Hollywood Bowl, but I also want to ask you guys, like, what kind of magic things happen? And I'm going to throw one more example. And Steve, I don't think you were there, but it's possible that you were. My dad used to put on a cantata Christmas time in the Catholic Church in town. It was a non-denominational thing, but he would do a Christmas cantata. And the first year we did it, the lights fell down because it was raining outside. And so they sang by candlelight and became like this thing.
I think I heard about that, actually. I think I remember hearing about that.
Yeah. So if we didn't know, Steve and I grew up in the same town. Yeah, and so it became a thing for the years that my dad did. He would put a band together and a choir and all that kind of thing. So there are these magical moments. So let's talk about the Hollywood Bowl, and then let's also talk about magical moments. And I'll let you start, Larry, because you're the guest.
Oh, well, I've not had the pleasure, so maybe, Steve, you want to take that?
Well, the Hollywood Bowl is an incredible. That was for me, and I'm sure, Larry, you have like a bucket list of things, right? That you just put it out there. You're just like, hopefully this will happen, and hopefully this will happen. For me, there was a couple of venues. Going back real quick to where we grew up, playing the Concord Pavilion was a bucket list of mine, and I got to play the Fujitsu Concord Jazz Festival because I was Rosemary Clooney's drummer for the last 5 years of her life. So we played there, and that was an unbelievable bucket list because I've gone to countless concerts there. I don't know how many jazz festivals, and someday I want to be on that stage. And just to get to do it was, and that was the same thing with Hollywood Bowl. And I was fortunate enough to work with John Williams, and David Newman was conducting the first half. So that's where we did the Born in a Trunk thing, among other stuff. And it's just one of those things that you're looking out, and it's just so surreal because you go to concerts there, but to experience it, and it was with the LA Phil, and it was just an absolute dream. And I'm sure, Larry, you've got concert halls I'm sure that you've wanted to go to, that you've been able to conduct. There's just these little, I like to call them just little mini goals that, so like for me with recording and producing, there's certain studios that I got a checklist. I'm going to try to knock that list off someday before I got to kick the bucket. There's the same thing with artists. There's certain artists that I'm dying to share the stage with.
Oh yeah. So I was just thinking. So you were the drummer for Rosemary Clooney last 5 years, as you say.
Yeah.
So when I'm not sure how many years before she passed away. But did you come to Colorado Symphony at some point with her?
That was right before I started. Okay. I started with her in 99.
Okay.
Yeah. And
I feel like that, because I went to Colorado 98 to 01. And I conducted the first half. She
might have just been a guest without the band. We had a big band. Okay. That was her band. So that was probably what it was.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was amazing. She was like, "Oh, and I have this nephew named George, and he's kind of starting out as trying this acting thing."
Yeah.
In terms of bucket list, there's lots of bucket list pieces for me. Pete, you mentioned Mahler at one point. The Second Symphony is one of my bucket list pieces. I've conducted some of the other symphonies, 1, 4, and 5. But the second is just the mammoth, giant orchestra and chorus. When I was with Pittsburgh, we got to play at the Musikverein in Vienna, one of the greatest halls of the world. So I've gotten to hear music and be in these amazing places. There's lots of places where I'd love to have some magical moment. I got to conduct Boston Pops at Tanglewood. That was a magical moment for sure. But yeah, it's like a never-ending list, though. There's so many places like that, and there's also so many experiences that I never thought that would ever happen that happened. And so it just keeps building on itself. Like if certain things are possible, then maybe other things are possible, and it's an unpredictable kind of career, being a conductor, and I think that's one of the things that makes it great and also difficult.
Yeah, but I think that's the beautiful thing about music, right? We that's what keeps us going, is all of these sort of what we feel that are tangible little goals. In terms of working with soloists, Larry, I think for the audience it'd be interesting. Like for example, Brahms violin concerto, right? You can put 3 different violinists up there and they're all going to play the piece completely different. So maybe, talking about working with a soloist, and to me, that's where really great conductors learn how to balance what the artist is trying to do, but also try to keep the piece with some integrity as well. And the challenges of that, because then sometimes performances happen and the artist does something completely different than they did in rehearsals. So I mean, talk about that whole journey, because I think it's really fascinating. And I think maybe for those who don't know, I mean, there's an incredible amount of trust and, there's a lot that goes into putting something like that on, especially conducting a soloist, a piano soloist, a violinist or cellist or whatever.
Yeah, that's definitely something where it shows, there's some conductors who are, really want to control everything. And even when there's a soloist up there, they still want to control everything. And I think that dynamic, there's a line where you have to be, you have to have, as you said, like having some musical integrity, your own viewpoint. But if it's a soloist, you really have to defer generally to what the soloist is doing. So, like some of the most famous soloists I've worked with also have, like a really wide range of wanting control, ceding control, wanting to have their own viewpoint completely. And it shows how flexible a conductor is if they're able to be able to get in the head of the soloist, even if it's not the thing that they want to do themselves musically. We have to do that all the time in pops, but I think even more so, it's much more nuanced with the concerto. And I did a concert with a great pianist named Natasha Poremsky, and we did all 4 of the Rachmaninoff piano concertos in 2 concerts. We had basically 1 rehearsal for each concerto, and then we just did all 4 in a row. And that was crazy because the whole time we are deferring to a soloist. She has to be able to show all the things that she wants to do musically, and we need to follow it. And I think that was one of the most challenging and exciting experiences for me.
I know we kind of lost track of this part of the question because I asked a complicated question, but magic moments where something happens, and then the other thing I want to ask, Larry, is there actually time for you to this orchestra is exactly on beat, I don't have to do anything. Can you just turn around and do the NFL lineman thing and get the crowd going? Because I know you're very interactive compared to a lot of other conductors that I've seen. So magic moments for you, Larry, and we'll ask Steve that next.
Well, I mean, I've had a lot of magical moments. First time I conducted Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. It's kind of, one of these really extremely, one of those goals everyone wants to at some point. If you're a conductor, there's before and after that you did that first Beethoven 9. And that was absolutely a magical, terrifying moment. And I remember feeling just completely intimidated and unprepared, even though I'd been studying this piece for probably 15 years before doing it. And so that was a magical moment for sure. And there are a lot of orchestras where they're so good that once you've done the rehearsals, once they know what you want to do, and even some before you do the rehearsals, they can play it perfectly. And you can, and I would joke about this with people when I talk about the art of conducting, that I could literally be doing this and they would play perfectly. I could do whatever. I could go like that and they would play perfectly. And there's a couple orchestras where I'll do a lot of shtick, at some Pops concerts. In San Diego, one time they were playing the Rocky theme. They can play the Rocky theme. They just start it and they don't have to stop and they don't have to watch. And I just ran around the audience and ran up the steps at the end and did, this. I did the 1-arm push-ups. You can do whatever you want because they can play it on their own. And then it allows, in certain kinds of concerts, in certain contexts, it gives us a chance to do something funny like that.
Oh, my turn. Oh my gosh. I go hearkening back a little bit to the Hollywood Bowl experience. I mean, that was certainly, to see John Williams on the podium is just, and the amount of respect that the orchestra has for him, he is to me, the closest thing to a Sibelius, a Beethoven living, you know what I mean? The way he writes and his approach to music is just unbelievable. And just to see him conduct his music, and he doesn't have to do much. And he'll just make one little comment here and there, and that's it. I mean, but just being on stage with him was just awe-inspiring and just incredibly magical. You know, the guy that I mentioned before, Matt Katnagoob, we've had some neat moments because we create a lot of shows ourselves, for example, and he does all the arrangements. So especially with our orchestra here in Macon, you know, we'll come up with some crazy theme idea, but he has to write all the arrangements. And I think, you know, especially in my town here, you know, Macon, Georgia is in the middle of the state. It's a town of about 120,000 people. There's a huge, rich music history, but, you know, I think seeing the reaction of our community, you know, seeing what we do, we really put a lot of effort into the technical part of the show with, you know, from production to lighting. We have live image mag and everything being meticulously mic'd and, you know, engineered and all that. I think seeing your hometown really appreciate what you do is something that you really strive for, I think, sometimes. And, you know, because we're not a big city. And so you hear the comment that, wow, I feel like I'm in New York or LA or, you know, because of the quality of what you're doing. I would say that was you know, we do a big Christmas concert each year where a gentleman had an idea of doing a light show, and there's 500,000 lights down 4.5 city blocks. And we recorded all of the music for it. And there are 4 shows that air every day. It's like Disneyland, right? So Matt and I do the voiceover. It's a script that I write. And each year we try to add new songs. But we had gotten a grant to kick off the light show because it runs for 5 weeks, 7 days a week. So you can go downtown and, you know, there's a 6, 7, 8, 9 o'clock show. And there are two different sets. But the first time we performed it, we had, you know, 10,000 people down the street. The second year, we had 25,000 people down 4.5 city blocks in our little town of Macon, Georgia. It felt like a Hallmark movie, and bringing the community together through music. And it just shows you the power and the importance of the arts and music in communities. And you know, when you have that taken away, I think it's too late for most people. And so I would just say, in terms of a really magical moment, just from touching you on a deeply personal level, was having that impact on a town that you created something that literally brought all 4 corners, socioeconomically, you know, demographically, you name it. When I look down the street and we're playing live, synchronized to 500,000 lights, is pretty spectacular.
Yeah, man. I just got to say, you don't need to hear this from me, but you're a hometown kid. And you're a little bit younger than me. Like I'm not a little brother because your older brother already is your big brother. But man, I'm so proud of you and what you've built.
Oh, thank you.
Incredible.
Thank you.
Because look, we're in California. Like there's nothing culturally important in Georgia from our point of view. And here you are in Macon, not even in Atlanta. And you do this incredible thing. Man, Steve, that is incredible. I love what you do. I love that you get to go out and do it. And hopefully you and Larry can get together and collaborate on something.
Yeah, man, let's go. I'm ready to go on the road, man. I'll play drums any show you want.
Let's do it.
I love it. I want to ask, so one of the things that blows me away when we go to the shows, I can't remember her name right now. There's a Russian concert pianist, Emmanuel Axe, came recently. And they sit down, you know, in his case, throws his tails back, sits down on that bench and doesn't have a single note. There is no football in front of him. There's no full notes, quarter note. There's nothing. And he just hammers away for 90 minutes like a boss, you know, and everybody else has music that they're going off of. Obviously he's the boss because it's his show. He's, you know, driving people there with his name and everything, but how does that work? And is that as incredible as it seems to have that concert performance level body of work just in your head, or does it become old hand, like singing and playing? If you've done it a million times, you just do it. How incredible is that? And how hard is that to manage when you're conducting?
You're talking about memorizing?
Yeah, when you memorize like a 45-minute piece of music, you know, and
yeah, it's, you know, someone like Manny Axe or any of these soloists, especially with the standard repertoire, there's this tradition of memorization. A lot of these pieces, many of them learned when they were younger, and not that it's, I mean, if they learned it when they were younger, a lot of times it's the memorization is even more firmly in their head. But it absolutely is incredible still, to see that, but it's also kind of expected with certain repertoire. And everyone memorizes differently. Some people have so there's a California-based pianist, John Nakamatsu, that I work with a lot. And I've asked him about memorization just to kind of get that in, get him to articulate how he does it. And he has lines of redundancy. Like he has a visual memory. It's not photographic, but it's pretty close. Mm-hmm. But then he has pitch memory because he has perfect pitch and he can just remember all the notes.
Right.
And then he has a physical kinesthetic memory of how it feels to play it, to the point where he doesn't have to physically think about this note, then that note, then this note, because there's like a routine of physicality that he has memorized that's within his body. And if one fails, then the other one hopefully will be there. And, there are definitely scary moments sometimes with a memorized soloist where they'll lose their memory on something, or something will happen in rehearsal, which is very scary for the soloist. Usually the audience doesn't know. Usually it's something so subtle the soloist can kind of wind their way out of it. But sometimes it happens, and they're all human, and we don't expect it. But there has been, and I'm not sure, it may have been someone like Franz Liszt, or maybe it was Paganini, or someone who was a composer performer who kind of became a rock star, like maybe Liszt, the pianist. And part of that was them going out there and having no music in front of them and playing everything memorized, and people would go crazy. And then that expectation kind of came into the culture. It's very typical to see a person playing a new concerto, one that they just learned, maybe one by a modern composer, with the music in front of them, even on an iPad or whatever, which people are increasingly doing, especially now. And that's totally acceptable, and people have no problem with that. But there is this kind of weird expectation that's there, and yes, it is always amazing.
I love that. It is. These are the things that I think about. The female, and I'm not even sure she was Russian. I believe she was, but when she sits down, she's like this dainty lady, very trim, beautiful gown, but forearms like a plumber. You're just like, look at her. She is. I mean, her body is adapted to what her job is, right? Her back muscles must just be incredibly powerful. But you look at how she, like a baseball pitcher, you can see that their arm is just different because they've professionally developed it. Someone like our first chair violinist is a guy named Dennis Kim. He plays a Stradivarius and everything. Is that true for all of these guys? Does Dennis have like a super powerful 3-finger grip on his bow, or are there different? My dad used to play tuba, right? And one thing he told me, he's like, once that tuba gets moving physically, like if you're walking or if you adjust yourself, you're not stopping it. Like if it's going to hit the floor, it's going to hit the floor. It's just, so you had to have some strength to be able to handle this tuba. Not that it moves often, but like if it starts to slide off, you've got to be able to control it. And so professionally, your body has to adapt. Does this make sense at all what I'm talking about?
Do you mean like they're holding a centuries-old instrument that could break if they dropped it,
or just how do
they handle
physically?
Yeah, I mean, violinists. So both of my kids play violin, and Dennis is the one that I know in Pacific. He's the one I went to school with. So, someone who's been playing the violin for a really long time, they just know how to handle violin. It's very comfortable for them. There's not going to be like accidentally dropping it. They're not going to overly grip it with a sweaty hand. This is just something that's very comfortable. It's an extension of their body.
Is there a extra large left trap from like?
Yeah. So like a lot of them violinists, like they will. It doesn't look like they're paying any particular attention to how they're holding it because they're just so comfortable with it. Yeah, so all musicians have that same kind of relationship with their instrument. And I think that it's to a person that doesn't play that particular instrument. It's like if someone hands me a French horn, it feels very foreign to my hand, and I have to not worry like when I watch them handling it, because I know that this is their instrument. It's just they know how to manage it.
Well, and being married to a violinist who, my wife was a former concertmaster of a couple of orchestras, the Florida Orchestra and Oregon Symphony, before assuming the directorship role of the Robert McDuffie Center for Strings here.
Who is it?
Amy Schwartz Moretti.
Oh. So she was in Portland. I feel like I was there when she was still with. Well, I mean, she played there with Carlos Kalmar.
Yeah, we were there 04 to 06. We weren't.
Yeah,
there
I mean,
very
I
long.
went up there. I mean, I just went up there to cover at one point when the assistant. I was in Dallas, and I'm sure I met her.
You know what? That's ringing a bell now. Actually, now that
That's
you're
really
saying
funny.
that,
Where did she go to school?
Cleveland. She was a
Okay.
Don Weilerstein student. She did both of her degrees at Cleveland. But it's interesting, because violinists, this, or viola too. I mean, this whole motion is not natural, right? The way your arm is, and so versus cello or even bass, you're a little bit more centered the way you play. And I have my studio cats drive me nuts.
Yeah.
But I think what's important too, just like I think with any instrument, whether you're a pianist or even a horn player, but there's certain things you have to do to maintain your body, right? So. Amy is religious about certain stretches and things she does, and she swims as well to keep her body in shape. But she's very meticulous about, she does scales, arpeggios, and she'll play a Bach as her warm up every day. She does her routine to maintain that. Just like, for me on the drums, there's just certain kind of things I'll do to just kind of warm up, and because the older we get, you got to make sure you keep doing that. It's not like you can just sit down and bust it out like you could when you were 20 years old. The body's changing. So I think in terms of that, Pete, to sort of kind of get a little bit, it's really important that, especially when you do this day in and day out, to maintain that level, you have to, you're essentially an athlete to a degree. You've got to take care of your body, even like a conductor. I mean, you're up there, you're doing, it's physical. And, God forbid you have a bad night of sleep and your neck is bothering you, that's going to affect you. So there's all of these little things that I think people don't realize. And that's why I think, like when I talk to students, setup and your approach to the instrument is so important for ergonomics and longevity, especially if you do want to have a career. But anyway, that's a small world that I'm sure you guys met each other.
Yeah, I mean, I know a lot of other people who teach there. I know a student there as well at Robert McDuffie's.
Who?
Well, I mean, there's a Jimmy Cunningham, a viola student there. He just
played last night. So Jimmy Lynn. So Amy runs a Fabian concert series that she's curated for the last 15 years. And I produce all the recordings, which is actually, I've got Jimmy Lynn and Bobby McDuffie, and that's what was behind me a second ago from last night's concert. And Jimmy Cunningham, he played not too long ago on one of the other concerts. I mean, he's a fabulous violist.
Yeah. He was in my youth orchestra. I mean,
he's great. And Amy and I were just talking about him today. And he, so she gives them opportunities, the students, to play on her chamber music series, which is a great, so here he's playing with Jimmy and Bobby and Amy and Becca Albers and Edward Aaron and, so because they're all the Becca and Julie and
I was just going to mention those two, but just because, and there's a third, I don't know if you know the third Albers, Laura.
Yeah.
But Becca was in the youth orchestra that I conducted in Denver. Julie was, I did probably like 10 solos with her, concertos with her.
Yeah.
I know that she really loves going down there from.
Well, she has a trio with Amy. The Cortona trio is Amy, Julie, and a pianist from Atlanta by the name of Elizabeth Pridgeon. But it's just such a great opportunity for these students to get real world experience playing with these amazing artists that come in and play on her series. But yeah, it was we weren't in Oregon for very long, and it was just sort of one of these things that Bobby had asked her to run the series, and it was like, well, we kind of got a good thing going. She's got this, and I was playing 5 nights a week when I wasn't on the road at that time. Tony Tania was one of the main artists. I was her drummer before she retired, and then a few other conductors, of course, but. So here we've been here now 15 years. And, who would have thought we would be here? Number one, that long, and number two, if you told me 15 years ago that I would have my own orchestra nonprofit that I started, I would tell you, you couldn't pay me enough, which I don't get paid, but still, you couldn't pay me enough to do it. It was, and we're coming into our 10th season, which is just crazy. It's amazing how small the music world really is. The degrees of separation is really, in most cases, no more than 2.
Oh yeah. I mean, we've never met, but we already know that, we know all the same people.
Yeah. Now, what was your primary instrument?
Clarinet.
Ah, cool.
Yeah. And
where'd you go to school?
And piano. I was University of Rochester pre-med.
Oh.
And then I took lessons at Eastman and
so you're one of those smart guys, pre-med.
Well, I don't know about that. then I went to IU, got a choral degree there, and then started the orchestral conducting degree, then transferred to Yale. I did Aspen. So, it was like a million years. And then Colorado Symphony was my first job out of that.
I wonder,
so
Amy, I don't know, we're probably close enough in age, perhaps, but I know Amy, she did Aspen a lot when she was at Cleveland. I know she was in a very serious quartet, the Cambiata quartet, that did a bunch out there. But yeah, it's we'll have to get you.
Well, when did she go?
Let's see. She would have graduated Cleveland. I graduated college in 96. She probably would have graduated in 97, maybe. And she then went on and finished her master's, I think around let's see.
And she went to Aspen around that time?
She would have been in Aspen around the mid 90s for sure. Sure.
We probably went the same time.
I'm sure. I need to get her in touch with you because I think it would be really cool. Because so what's happened now at the center, I'm sure you've heard, is they have what's called the Macon Mercer Symphony. Unfortunately, our Macon Symphony folded, sadly. And so what they do is they've got all of the strings from the McDuffie Center which are about 26. And then it's a partnership with the principal winds and brass of the Atlanta Symphony. So it's an educational endeavor. It's not a professional orchestra by any means, but they come in and they sort of mentor the students, and it gives them a chance to expand the repertoire that they get to do. And I think it'd be awesome to have you come down and conduct, because I think you'd be fabulous. So I'll talk to, I know some people. I can make a
I'm going to jump in here. You guys are playing catch up everything, and I love it. It's making me a big smile, but we're going to run out of time, and I want to get to a couple of things. And I didn't get a chance to ask this question, so I just want to say this out loud because Dr. Bob talked about this recently in his Music Mondays. There's a guy named Mick Gillette that played the hell out of the horns. He was like a live orchestrator. He could do anything, just super gifted. And there's a video of this guy and he played in the Tower Power horn section, right? Like he fronted it for a long time. And they're all playing live, and he's like, I got a trumpet, do-do-do-do-do. He's like, now I got the trombone, do-do-do-do-do. And he's switching instruments live mid-song, and it's just insane. I wanted to ask if you guys have anything like that, where you see someone who's so gifted at music that the bounds of normal, like these are the normal limits, playing two different, horn instruments in the same songs. No one does that because the embouchure is different and everything's different. You can be great at them individually and in a different song, but have you guys seen that kind of level of genius in the orchestras that you've been in? And then we'll go from there.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking just two people that just in the pops realm. One was Marvin Hamlish or Ann Hampton Calloway. The two of them,
she's great.
They can play piano. They can Marvin can kind of sing, but he can play piano. He could play piano and conduct. And they're kind of just able to navigate all the different things. For Anne, it would be playing piano and singing and making up music on the spot. And that's something that Marvin was really famous for doing. And he would then conduct and then just go over to the piano and play. And then I remember a long time ago, I did a concert with Arturo Sandoval.
Yeah.
Who, obviously.
I got to play with him a couple of times.
Yeah.
He's crazy.
Yeah, he's crazy. And
holy moly.
Yeah, he can play piano. So everyone thinks of him as this trumpet, just a trumpet player, just a phenomenal trumpet player. But then he'll go over and just
shred on the piano. Like jam. I'm talking just chops. Go and not for his harmonic vocabulary. I remember in rehearsal, we were playing with the Honolulu Symphony, and I remember, he played the Haydn trumpet concerto on the first half, and then we did a bunch of Latin stuff on the second half. So after the orchestra was done, he's like, okay, we're just going to run through a couple of trio numbers. We'll call a couple of tunes. And so then we start playing, and then he takes a solo, and I almost stopped playing. I'm like, what in the world? I mean, it was incredible. For me, there's the guy, Matt, that I keep talking about, Matt Kattengoob. And his mom was Mavis Rivers, who was a well-known jazz singer. She was the first female singer to be signed to Frank Sinatra's Reprise record label. And so we actually have a new record coming out called From Samoa to Sinatra, and it's paying homage to his mom, but we actually extracted some of her vocal tracks. So Matt's doing some duets with his mom with all these new arrangements. We've got a couple on the Sinatra station on Sirius XM right now, but the record's planning on coming out. But he's one of these guys where he plays sax. He was in Louis Bellson's band when he was 17. He's a great singer, plays piano, and he's actually a good drummer. So I'm like, dude, I mean, you cannot play drums, otherwise I'm not going to have a gig. So, and he's the same thing that Larry was saying. He's a really good conductor and an incredible arranger. And he was, before the age of all of these computer programs, I remember being on flights with him, and he would just be writing arrangements out. He's one of these crazy perfect pitch. He hears everything in his head and just starts writing it out in his airplane seat, for crying out loud. No. And I remember, what are you doing? I got to get this arrangement done for the Honolulu Symphony. I'm like, I hate you. But I love you, but I hate you.
That's funny.
Okay, I want to close out with this. I don't want to take any more of you guys' time. I love this, and I want to do more of these things, and this has just been so great. So thank you both for coming on the show. Larry, I want to ask you, we have this belief, especially parents, that it's good for kids to practice and play an instrument and everything, but you'll never make money in the orchestra. And I could say as a parent, like, look at Larry. There's only so many jobs doing what Larry does, and look what he has to do to make it. But you do it, right? You have this thing, and you're like, I play this place. I play with this place. I did, you have all these experiences, so you absolutely can make money in music. So talk about that, and then just promote in general the things that you're working on and you're doing, so that everybody can know where to go find it and which symphony to go to and all those things.
Well, studying an instrument can lead to many things. It can lead to a career as a performer. It can lead to a career as a teacher. You can kind of move, like I did, kind of in the lateral kind of other track as a conductor. At one point I was going to teach music theory. And so there's lots of different things that you can do. You can promote the arts. You can be a marketer. You can be an administrator. You can be an artistic administrator where you choose soloists and plan programs. You can be a stage person. You can be a kind of behind the scenes. You can be the sound person. There's so many areas where you can find work after studying music. And music also, I think this is one of these great side benefits to studying, is that it teaches you that everything doesn't have to come immediately. That when you study an instrument, every day that you study is a small step towards a goal that maybe you'll never even reach. But the thinking, the state of mind of working step by step in a slow progression, and the benefits of that, I think, can transfer to many other fields. So, my son, really serious violinist, studied really hard, thinking maybe he'd want to be a professional musician. He might, but he decided to go. He's at Brown University as a freshman studying chemistry and math. So like that, all of that work didn't just go down the drain, and he's continuing to love music. He plays in the orchestra there, but it also taught him about the building blocks of math. And it all kind of relates. And then in terms of things that I'm doing, this year in Syracuse, we're finishing our 9th year of existence. The orchestra I conduct here, where I'm music director, is the successor to the Syracuse Symphony, which is an orchestra that went bankrupt in 2012. And the musicians formed this other orchestra, and it's a completely different model. One that I'm really proud of, which is a cooperative kind of orchestra, where the musicians are all involved in every part of this orchestra, including marketing, including programming, and then, of course, performing. So it's a very collaborative relationship, and we're heading into our 10th season. We're finishing this season with Copland Third Symphony. There's just like so much excitement here with this orchestra and what we've built. And so in particular, I'd love for people to check out, if you go to my website, you can see all the things that I'm doing. But yeah, that I saw the experience Symphoria.org. That's the place to go to see all the different things that we're doing. We have a LA-based principal Pops who's raised in Syracuse, named Sean O'Loughlin, who also does a lot of Pops conducting all over the country. And he and I are always talking about just programs and working. Both of us got to work with John Williams also, and that kind of awe that we all have is something I think it's kind of universal. So check us out.
Steve, same question. Can you make money as a musician and then promote the hell out of Macon Pops and whatever else you're working on?
Well, I think really what Larry was saying, there's so many things. And like, for example, like your son will get into a community where, depending what what direction his career goes, but you have an art supporter, right? You have someone who is going to love the arts and support the arts. That's crucial, and I think the cultivating aspect of future supporters is where some markets lack, right? They all want to work on promoting the next generation, but sometimes they're scared with their programming to go that direction, right? And so, maybe getting some other invigorating energy into a community that could help some of these organizations. So there's that side. Yes, you can make money. I think it depends on your mindset, right? I think we all have the mindset, we want to get out there, we want to play. And sometimes your journey takes you a different path. And how do you adapt, right? And I think having the sense of, the business side of things, learning how to deal with challenges and how to try to find a positive way. So, like for me, doing a lot of session work and yes, the Pops is mostly my bread and butter. That's what I fly 130,000 miles a year doing, but I do a lot of recording. And if you told me when I was in school that I'd be a producer, I've recorded, and engineered a bunch of records for the Ennis Quartet with James Ennis, my wife, Richard O'Neill, and Edward Aaron. And they're out right now on Onyx Records. If you told me I would be doing that with the producer in England simultaneously, I would say you're nuts. There's no way I'm going to do that. But I really got into producing because I always love and always had a finicky ear for things. And now to be able to sort of guide people musically or guide, and it's interesting that I've been doing a lot more classical producing, which is odd. I mean, from opera records, even singers have said, look, I don't want an opera producer. I want you, because you're going to take it in a different direction, still keep the integrity, but, give it some more modern appeal to it, which sounds great, but it's a lot of pressure. And but just that journey, right? So, and I'll do some engineering, sometimes live sound, and but having all of these things, right? And I think some of the younger generation that I see that worries me. They just think I'm practicing my instrument. That's all I'm going to do. What they're trying to do, what they're doing at the Robert McDuffie Center for Strings is arming them with business skills and entrepreneur classes and law, contract law, so they have a well-rounded knowledge. Okay, I didn't get this orchestra gig. I didn't get this teaching gig. Well, maybe I can start a little festival in my community, right? So just getting them to think a little bit differently outside the box, which I just how I got into producing was I was in grad school up in the Bay Area at Cal State Hayward, and I was in this group, and these guys said, hey, you want to produce the record? I was like, yeah, sure, no problem. I didn't know what I was doing, right? You say yes to the gig, and you figure it out as you go, as you hear it often. And so that's exactly what had happened. And so with Macon Pops, like Larry too, we're in our 10th season, and we're just trying to keep things cutting edge with our programming, and we've got an interesting approach to some Gershwin music. Matt wrote a big band arrangement of Rhapsody in Blue, so it's taking the piano part, but he sort of rearranged it, and Jens Lindman is playing the trumpet on it, and it's that's the clarinet part. But we've expanded it now where you can do it with orchestra too. It's a whole different arrangement. So we're going to do something different for us, a little bit more traditional, where we're going to do a Gershwin program next year. And we're also coming up with a fun program. We don't know the title of it, but we're calling it something like 22 for 22, since it's 2022. So coming up with music from the 2000s, from 2000 to 2022. So it's sort of play on our Dancing Through the Decades theme that we did, which is dance music from the 1940s through today. But now we're just going to highlight this decade. And then we're going to do sort of a classic rock thing. We're just going to kind of pick a couple of decades, but highlight like Zeppelin and Queen and, all of that, but with Matt's arrangements. And so, he keeps me on my toes. But going back to, can you make money? Yeah, it depends on how hard you want to work, honestly, just like with any job. If you have the drive, obviously you're going to have the talent to a degree, otherwise you wouldn't be going through school and getting to where you're at. Now it's harnessing that and getting a broader understanding of how to survive in the business. That's really, I think, what will ensure people's success.
I love it. And by the way, if it's coming through, I can't hear it, but the Santa Anas are blowing my tent down right now. And so
actually it's not. It's got good isolation there.
And if you're not a musician and you're not trying to bug your kid to be one, hey, go down and support the arts. I'm going to go see Katherine Jenkins sing in front of my symphony, the Pacific Symphony, next weekend, and it costs $30 to get in the room. Maybe $35. You want to upgrade your seat. $30 to go see an incredible, like a world-class symphony, plus this person who travels the nation, world, wherever she wants to go, and singing. These are absolute pinnacle performers. If you're not comfortable with symphony, if you don't know what, let me just tell you this: there's a lot to learn, there's a lot to see, there's a lot to experience, or you can just zone out and let the music do its job, like it's been doing for 100, 150, 200 years. It's been great music forever, and these folks, like Steven, like Larry, like everybody else they've been talking about, they're desperate to do this for you and have you love it like they do. So let them do this. Go out and see it. $60. What kind of a date is that? That's fantastic. It's so good. You guys, I love what you've done and what we're talking about today. I want to do more of these things because it's just so inspirational. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Anything in closing from either of you guys?
Thanks so much for having me and this is fun getting to connect with Larry, and it's really been a joy. And I'll just underscore, there's nothing like live music, especially seeing 60, 70, 80 people on stage. There's nothing can ever replace that.
I'll echo that. It's been around for a long time for a reason. It's and what an orchestra can do, the range of music, and just like the power of music, if you just think of it just in terms of film, which is something that so many people can relate to, and maybe you take a movie like one that John Williams scored, let's say E.T., and you think about those scenes towards the end of the movie, and just imagine it without the music, it's impossible.
Right.
Just the effect that it has on the emotions, and you can experience that all the time going to live music.
Love it. Stand by, fellas.